Welcome to the sixth and final installment of a twice-told tale, the retelling of Tanach in the Aggadah. In this shiur, we outline the similarities and differences between the concept of gilgul, reincarnation or metempsychosis, and our principle in the Aggadah. We explored the story of one of the, spoiler alert, 4 Jewish temples, Beit Chonyo, and compare it to the story of Pesel Micah. Finally, we offer some thoughts as to what the reason for this principle might be, taken from, of all places, Artscroll biographies. I hope you've enjoyed this fugue. Thank you for listening. If you find the material here interesting, I hope you'll consider sharing it with a friend. Okay, so first of all, Mazel Tov. This will be our final shiur in the Twice Told Tale series. The reason I have those Svarim on Gilgulim out is because of what you mentioned last week. So I think that there is differences and similarities between the concept of gilgul and what we're trying to talk about. There is, so what you have over there is, that's a gilgul and a shamos, that's probably from the Rama,
1560s,
right,
something like that.
Right. Menachem Azaria of Fano. We have a lot of Svarim from him. He wrote Shilas and Shuvas. And then the set over there is Sefer HaGilgulim. It's a bunch of different smaller works on Gilgul, a lot of it from Ruchaim Vital. So the project of Gilgul, I think, is different than, well, we'll compare and contrast. What I see commonly when we're talking about Gilgulim, which, just for the fun of throwing around the $5 word, the academics will call metempsychosis, is the idea that the story isn't over. So a lot of what you get in Gilgul is righting wrongs or finishing off a story. So,
right, a story, the completion of an arc.
Right. So Cain kills Hevel, and that's not fair. Hevel was innocent. Why does Cain kill Hevel? So it must be that there's a reincarnation, and the story comes full circle. So Cain is reincarnated in the Mitzri, and Moshe is reincarnated. Hevel's reincarnated in Moshe, and Moshe kills the Mitzri, and that kind of completes the story.
Right, or in an alternative scenario, one guy kills the other. Okay, it's unjust, and then in the next go around, he doesn't kill the guy. He shows him mercy, right, and he rectifies what he did wrong.
Right.
Whatever outcome. Sort of,
right, whatever tikkun or whatever,
right, flips the script, and
right, whatever is needed in order for the story to come to the conclusion that the resolution that it needs is what you get in Gilgulim. I think what we're seeing more in this sort of pattern or paradigm is an intentional reworking or including a reference to existing stories in Tanach, not
like a fugue in music, like variations.
That's exactly what we started off with, exactly like a fugue in music. So it's not to say the story was incomplete and now here's the completion of it, but rather the story itself in Tanach is a paradigm, right? And now let's see that paradigm continue to play out in the Aggadah.
You ever read TV tropes?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a whole tab for certain ones where it says playing with. So,
that's interesting.
Have you ever seen this? So they'll say, here's the trope played straight.
Right.
Here's the trope exaggerated. Here's the trope subverted. Okay. Here's the trope inverted. Here's the trope discussed. Here's the trope defied. Here's the trope deconstructed. Here's the trope reconstructed. And these are all the different ways that the story
can play with the concept.
Right.
Very nice. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is go through one final example and then talk about a possible explanation for the meaning of the pattern. Why does it exist at all? So the last example I'd like to present you with comes to us from a Gemara in Menachos. But first, you get a little bit of Jewish trivia. If I were to ask you how many Jewish temples were there, meaning temples that were built by Jews for Jews to offer up sacrifices to God, how many would you say there were?
The obvious answer is 2, but...
Okay.
By Jews.
By Jews, for Jews, in order for Jews to offer up sacrifices to God.
Right.
So Herod was really just expanding and building upon the existing. So what would you say if I told you the answer is 4? 2 of them in Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, whether it's 2 or whether it's 1 that was rebuilt, we can kind of quibble with, but that's in Eretz Yisrael. 2 of them in, ironically enough, Egypt. 1 temple was built in the island of Elephantine by a Jewish garrison, and the other is a temple built in Leontopolis. Be careful how you Google that word.
Oh God.
It was built by and for Jews in Egypt, in the town Leontopolis, and is referenced in the Mishnah of all things. So what I'm going to read to you is a sampling of first the Mishnah Menachos and then the Gemara that discusses this temple, and whether or not you can bring korbanos in the temple of Onias, or Beit Chonyo. The Mishnah in Menachos says as follows. So, has anyone heard of this Beit Chonyo?
Mm-hmm.
We actually have we've got a picture here of the ruins. This is known today in Egypt as Tel El Yehudaya, the Jewish hill. And that is in Leontopolis in Egypt. Not a very photogenic person posing for the picture there. Okay. So, Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Hare alai ola. If a person says, I am making a vow to bring an ola, yakrivena b'mikdash. He has to bring the ola in the Beit HaMikdash, right? That's kind of straightforward. V'im hikriva b'Beit Chonyo. But if instead he brings this sacrifice in the temple of Chonyo, in the temple of Onias, meaning in Egypt, lo yatsa. Thankfully, he's not yotze. It gets a little more complicated. Hare alai ola shakrivena b'Beit Chonyo. What if he makes a vow to bring this korban in the Beit Chonyo? Yakrivena b'Mikdash, and then he should.
Real Beit HaMikdash?
Right, then he has to bring it in the real Beit HaMikdash. V'im hikriva b'Beit Chonyo. But what if he's in Egypt, makes this vow, brings it in the temple that he planned to bring it to? Yatsa.
Beit Chonyo.
Beit Chonyo, yeah.
It's in Avodah Zarah.
It's an Avodah Zarah.
No?
You tell me.
I think so, like Daphne or something.
So Chonyo is a guy. He's a Kohen. We're gonna learn all about him in a second. So the Tanach of our Mishnah says, "V'im hikriva b'Beit Chonyo." If he again vows to bring it in the temple of Onias, he brings it in the temple of Onias. Yatsa, he is Yotze. Rabbi Shimon Omer ein zeh ola. Rabbi Shimon says that is not considered a consecrated burnt offering. Okay, so now the Gemara thankfully asks the question that you're all chomping at the bit to ask me. Yatsa? What do you mean he's Yotze? Ha mikda katla. He just killed it. This is not how you offer a korban. You can't bring a korban in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. You can't bring a korban in some other dudes. Place. Yeah, some Egyptian guy has a temple, and you're gonna what? Okay, so that the Gemara then goes through and essentially comes out with the result that we are all expecting, which is you're not Yotze if you bring it in this Beit Chonyo. But it's interesting that the Tanaim are aware of this temple and are dealing with, like, the reason this question came up is because it's worth debating, right? There must have been people who brought this question up. It wasn't as if it was so clear cut to everybody that it's beyond the pale of discussion. They had to discuss it, and there seems to have been, a back and forth and maybe 2 different opinions in the Mishnah.
These 2 temples existed in times of both Israel.
So the temple of Onias existed concurrently with the second Beis HaMikdash, not the first. Yes. Ella Amar Rava Adam ze l'daron ischavin. This guy, what was he doing trying to make a dedication to the temple? He was essentially giving a gift, meaning a gift to Avodah Zarah. Amar isagi bebeit chonyo tarachna tfei lo matzina litzteure. If I can, in other words, the guy, like, we're trying to understand psychology of the person who made this neder. He's basically saying, look, I don't want to be bothered going all the way to Yerushalayim. I love God, so I want to make a donation. Can I make a donation in the temple over here? Great. If I have to get in my car and drive 400, forget it. That I'm not willing to go that far. Another Mishnah. HaKohanim sheshimshu bebeit Chonyo. There are Kohanim. There are priests that are serving in this Beit Chonyo. Lo yishamshu b'mikdash. Once you do that, you're beyond the pale. So if you, Mr. Kohen, go and work in Beit Chonyo, you're not welcome in the Beis HaMikdash. You're Pesel to be a Kohen. Lo yishamshu b'mikdash sheb'Yushalayim. Ve'ein tzarich lomer ledavar acher. And certainly, if the Kohen is involved in actual avodah zarah, then for sure, forget about Beit Chonyo. If he goes to any temple and is a Kohen to avodah zarah, then he's Pesel to work in the Beis HaMikdash. And then they quote a pasuk, lo ya'alu kahanei b'amot el mizbach Hashem b'Yushalayim ki'im achlu matzot b'kerev achehem. Harei elu kebale mumim chalukim v'ochlim v'lo makrivim. They are like these Kohanim are like Kohanim who have a mum, they have a blemish. Meaning they can get a certain portion of the meat that is for Kohanim, but they're not allowed to offer up the sacrifices. Okay, so now we're going to get some background information from the Gemara on the whole situation of this temple of Onias. How did this come to be? So you may be familiar with one of the last, just about the last great Kohen Gadol in the times of the Beis HaMikdash was Shimon HaTzadik. After that, everything went downhill. B'shas Petiraso, at the time of Shimon HaTzadik's death, Amar Lahem, he tells the sages, I have more than one son. He says, Chonyo b'ni yishamish tachti, my son Onias, so he should be the next Kohen Gadol, right? I want him to take my place. Niskanabo Shimi Achiv. So Shimon HaTzadik has two sons. He has Chonyo and he has Shimi. And Shimi hears about this and he is jealous of his brother Shahaya Kohen Gadol.
Jr.
Right. He is Kohen Gadol. Shahaya Gadol Mimeno Shtei Shanim Umechsa. Because not only is it not fair, I'm older. I'm like, I should be next up in line. I'm 2.5 years older than this guy. So why am I getting passed over? Amar lo ba v'lamdecha seder avoda. So unfortunately, Shimon HaTzadik's son Chonyo is not such a Talmud Chacham. So Shimi says, under the guise of being a nice brother, come, let me teach you how to be Kohen Gadol. Let's go sit and learn the halachos. Hilbisho be'unkali v'chagru be'tziltzul hemidu etzal hamizbeach. So he dresses him up in a tunic that is unkali, and he girds him with a ribbon as a belt. So not wearing what the Kohen Gadol is supposed to wear, he decks him out in some sort of weird fashion sense that is wholly inappropriate for what he's about to do. And then Shimi says, Amar lahem lo achiv hakohanim ra'u ma nadar zeh. Why don't you come see what this guy must have promised, nadar zeh v'kiyam, what he promised la'ohavaso, to his girlfriend. Oso hayom sheishtamish b'kahuna gedola albish b'unkali shalichi v'achgur b'tziltzili shalichi. When it comes time for me to be the Kohen Gadol, I'm gonna wear all the stuff that you knitted up for me. You made me this tunic and you wove this belt for me, and I'm gonna wear all your pretty stuff rather than the actual clothes of the Kohen Gadol. So in a sense, the brother is setting up Chonyo for disaster over here. Bikshu achiv hakohanim lahargo. So the Kohanim, not known for their mild temperament, they want to kill Chonyo. Ratz mivnehem, so he runs away from them. V'ratzu achrav, they follow him. Halach l'Alexandria shel Mitzrayim. He goes down to Alexandria of Mitzrayim. Ubana sham mizbeach, and he builds a mizbeach over there. V'hela love l'shum avodas kochavim, and he turns it into a temple of avodah zarah, just as we were told. Shishamu chachamim bedavar amru mazeh shelo yarad la kach hayored la alachas kama v'kama. The chachamim say the person he didn't go down for this purpose explicitly, meaning he wasn't there intentionally to start a new religion. Someone who intentionally goes there and participates, how much more so that they are Pesel L'Kahuna. That's Divrei Rabbi Meir. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda lo kach haya ma'isa. Rabbi Yehuda says, Meir, you've got your history all wrong. That's not how it happened. Ella lo kibel alav Chonyo shahaya shimi achiv gadol mimenu shtei shanim umechsa. Rather, instead of it being brother against brother, in fact, Chonyo deferred to his older brother. V'af al pikein niskana bo Chonyo b'shimi achiv amar lo baval amdecha seder avodo v'helbishu b'unkli v'chagru b'tziltzli v'hemidu eitzel mizbeach amar lo. So the whole dress thing happened, but Rabbi Yehuda has it in reverse. That Chonyo first deferred to his older brother, but he was jealous, and so he actually set up the older brother in the whole garb and regalia, and tried to get the older brother in trouble. And then he says to the Kohanim, "Ro man nada zevikim lo ohavaso oso hayom sheyishtamish bekuna gadol alabish beunkli shalichli ve'achkor betziltzli shalichi." Bikshu achiv v'kohanim lahargo. So the Kohanim didn't want to kill Chonyo; they wanted to kill his brother Shimi. Sach lehem kol hamaura. But then Shimi tells them what happened, that Chonyo set him up. So then they turned on Chonyo. Bikshu laharogas Chonyo, and then Ratzu mipneihem v'ratzu acharav Ratzu lebeis hamelech v'ratzu acharav kol haro. So Omer zehu shahalach la'Alexandria so Mitzrayim ubana. Fine, etc., etc. So that is essentially how the story played out according to Rabbi Yehuda. That in either case, the result is the same. Chonyo ran down to Mitzrayim because he feared for his life, not necessarily going there in order to build this temple for Avodah Zarah, but that is how it played out in reality.
It's interesting you couldn't find something a little bit more consequential than like cross-dressing. I know, I mean, obviously for a Kohen, but I'm saying like it just seemed like more of a...
Like, why is that the thing he picked to be his undoing?
I'm saying it's not like there was no commandment at the time.
Why doesn't he like make his offering piggle or something so people think that he's like...
I'm glad that you honed in on that, because that's going to be relevant to us in just a minute. Tanya Amr Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia B'tchila Kol HaOmer Allah La Ani Kofso V'Nosno Lefi Hari. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia says, initially, before I was put in a place of authority, I would tell anyone who wanted me to go be the Nasi, I'm going to tie you up and put you in front of a line. Like, I have no interest in that position of authority. Ata, but now that I am in charge, Kol ha'omer li leirid. Anyone who tells me, why don't you stop being the Nasi and go back to the base magician, we'll put someone else in your place. Ani matil alav kumkum shel chamin. I would pour boiling water on him. Shaharei Shaul Baruch Mimena. Shaharei Shaul Baruch Mimena. How does this story make any sense? Why would I initially run from this position and now I won't let anyone take me out of it? Because I'm patterning my behavior after Shaul HaMelech. That Shaul Baruch Mimena, originally when Shaul was supposed to be appointed king, he was hiding out with the luggage, and then Ukisha'Allah, once he was king, Bikesh Laharagas David, he wanted to kill David for coming to take his place. Now, I think this last piece would not really qualify in our pattern for the same reason we had at the very beginning, where the story doesn't make sense unless you have the pasuk or the example from Tanach. We're looking for a little bit more of a subtlety in terms of the Aggadah. And what I'd like to do is contrast the whole story we heard about Beit Chonyo with the story of Pesel Micah. So we did Pesel Micah many moons ago. Just very briefly, does everyone remember the story? Shoftim, there's this guy.
Descendant of Moshe.
It comes. Well, we'll get to. He comes from Shevet Dan. So his mother is sort of syncretic, like she maybe worships Judaism and something else, and he has this idol that we have to be careful when you are davening. You have to be careful to say mi kamocha, because we don't want you saying mi kamocha, which would be a reference to Pesel Micah, this idol that maybe they took all the way from Mitzrayim. Anyway, this guy from Shevet Dan recruits a Levite who is what you were mentioning from possibly a descendant of Moshe Rabbeinu, to be his priest in a temple that he is setting up for this Pesel Micah, for this idol. Now, the Pesel is like a statue.
And the idol's Micha Mocha.
Right, the idol's name, the idol was called Micha. And so we don't want you to say Micha Mocha, which would be Pesel Micha, Chas v'Shalom, is like, comparing it to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Now, in this time, meaning in the time of the Shoftim, there's no Beit HaMikdash, so private altars are permitted, but there is a Mishkan and Shiloh, and the altars have to be to Hashem, not to anything else. So if you juxtapose these two stories, you have a priest who is disqualified from service, right? Either Chonyo or this Levite who's now worshiping Avodah Zarah. You have actual Avodah Zarah, and you have, in the story, we're not going to read it inside, just because we don't have the time to go through the two chapters, but there is an overemphasis both in the story of Chonyo and in the story of Pesel Micah on the clothing. The mother has a whole story with the clothing, and she steals money. He steals money from her, and she was going to make it into clothes. There's an emphasis throughout the story of Pesel Micah on the clothing, which to me is very interesting. That just what you pointed out, that in this story, the thing that is the undoing of the Kohen is the clothing, and you have this weird idea that there is two places to offer up korbanos that are concurrent. The Beis HaMikdash and Beit Chonyo versus the Mishkan and Shiloh and the temple to Micha, both happening concurrently. So I think there's an interesting way to look at these two stories, or the story of Beit Chonyo, which we know is a historical fact. Like, we know the place existed. Forget about what we know from Chazal. Like, there's archaeological evidence of this place. We know that it existed, and yet in telling the story, Chazal make sure to include clues or pattern the story after some of the same themes that we find in the story of Pesel Micah. Okay. Now we get a quote. This is from Douglas Hofstadter. Anybody a Douglas Hofstadter fan? A little bit? Godel Escher Bach? Yeah? Okay. If you listen to each voice on its own, you would find that it seemed to make sense all by itself. It could stand alone, and that is the sense in which I meant that it is independent. But you are quite right in pointing out that each of these individually meaningful lines fuses with with others, in a highly non-random way to make graceful totality. The art of writing a beautiful fugue lies precisely in this ability to manufacture several different lines, each one of which gives the illusion of having been written for its own beauty, and yet, when taken together, form a whole, which does not feel forced in any way. Okay, so we've seen maybe a couple dozen examples of this pattern in the Aggadah, that Chazal, in telling these stories, look to stories in Tanach and find ways to incorporate it into their storytelling. Part of the reason that I wanted to go through this is just selfishly because I'm hoping that as everybody here learns a Gemara, if you come across more of these, please share them. I'm trying to collect as many as I can. But I think what we need to do before we conclude is address a question that Yissi Steinhardt asked me, and I will paraphrase. When I first started talking to him about this concept, he said, okay, that's all well and good that you found a pattern, but so what? What does it mean? Why should I care? Why is it there? This is not just a good question. I think it's the question. How does any of this impact my avodas Hashem in any meaningful way? So I would like to try to answer that question by making reference to Artscroll biographies of Gedolim. I'm hoping everyone here is at least somewhat familiar with the books that Artscroll puts out on the life stories of Gedolim, of, let's say, the past generation or two or three.
He was born with tefillin on his arm. Right.
So the much maligned Artscroll biographies
They're
really
not bad. I own quite a few. I'm just saying. But.
So to me, they come across as kind of copy paste of what you were describing. The person was born, and from a young age showed what's that?
It's hard to read.
Yeah, they're hard to read because there's no flaws, there's no blemishes. All the wrinkles get ironed out. all the
This is-
mistakes
I-
are elided,
Right.
and
It doesn't have a character arc. It doesn't have.
it's hagiography more than biography, right?
What's hagiography?
It's extolling overly. It's rewriting it in a way that only shows the positive.
Right. I mean, I think the lion's share of these books, because I've read a number of them, is focusing on when they're already great and they already have Das Torah, and such person Nebuch has a problem, and this is the Das Torah way that this person approached it, and wow, how awesome.
Right.
And a regular person is just like, all right, you know what, awesome. Like, it's nice to know like a flavor of how a great person acts in a given situation, or how to show a little extra sensitivity. But like, I'm more interested in going from A to B than I am from like once you're already at B and everything's like amazing.
Right. Okay. So I will at Chatai Ani Maskir Hayom, I have certainly maligned Artscroll biographies in the past, so I'm going to try to be Melamed Zchus on them. Why do they write these stories the way that they write them?
They want to inspire people.
So I think that's right. I think I think what they're trying to do is give people the sense that, like, if you tell people to look up to, I don't know, Abraham or Rebbe Akiva, that's very far removed, right? But if you can give people the sense that there were giants that lived in the last generation, that you overlapped with people who are just unbelievable. You read these stories, and the reason you can't believe them is because they took out all the warts and the problems. But they're describing people who are amazing, and they're saying you live in amazing times. It's not that the heroes of Judaism are gone in ancient history and no one will ever approach that level. No, there is, in your own day and age, we the Jewish people have been able to produce people like this, that are at that caliber, that are at that level, right? There's something inspiring about thinking that you can live among giants, that your time can produce that kind of caliber of person.
There's also, I mean, we're taught in med school, don't eat anywhere where your patients can see you. Your patients don't want to think of you as a human being with frailties and, foibles and, a wife and a kid. They want to see you as the person who will save them. They want the image of big S on the chest with the cape blowing in the wind. I will fix you. Have no fear. That's, when someone's dying or scared or sick or whatever, or God forbid their kid or whatever, they don't want to know that I'm a human being. So don't eat in front of the patients. And I feel like that's another aspect of why Artscroll does that. It's like,
that's interesting.
They don't want you to question the leadership. They want you to feel secure that this person is steering the ship.
That could be too. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with that. I'm trying to go in a slightly different direction, which is that what I think comes out from that approach is that you also live in great times. Your leaders are not necessarily as great as the people in Tanach, but you also have greatness in your times that you are among and that you are part of, and you can see your age as an age that produces those kinds of people.
Right. So what?
So what I think that Chazal were doing in patterning these stories was taking a look at the events of their lives and the heroes in their time, and saying that's a replay of something that happened in Tanakh. That in my age, meaning in the times of the Tanoim and the Amoraim, God still operates in a relationship with the Jewish people the way He did in the times of Tanakh. The trope, if you will, or the pattern is here again. That it's some of that, but it's seeing your own times as being a reflection of the story that the relationship that God forged in the times of Tanakh. I don't know if I'm putting this across as clearly as I want, but the idea is, it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're in a plane or you're on a boat and you hit some turbulence, so suddenly you're throwing out your stuff to be like Nicanor and to be like Yonah and throw. That's not the idea, but the idea is to look at the events of your life the way Chazal also looked at the events of their life and say, how can I see Tanach in my life? How can I see the themes that played out in Tanach in my encounter? To use the language of Hasidus, so everybody experiences Tanakh in their own lives. There are times in your life where you have to leave your Egypt. There are times in your life where you have to fight your Amalek.
Or
right?
your Lavan. Or
Whatever,
your Esav,
whatever it might be.
Whatever.
Right, whatever it might be. But the idea there is that if you can look at the events of your life not just as happenstance, but as continuing the theme of Tanakh, there is inspiration in that. There is an emboldenment that says that it didn't just happen then; it's still with us in the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu relates to me in my life. I can see it as that same relationship that existed with the Avos, with the heroes of Tanakh, and in telling their stories in the Aggadah with the reference to Tanakh, I think that's part of the message that they're trying to impart to us is see your story as a continuation of the story that started in the Chumash, in the Navi, in the Ksuvim, and by doing that, your story is greater than just your own local event. Does that make sense?
I like it.
In so doing, I think you become part of a chain. So Rabbi Sachs, I think I have his book somewhere over there. He Zechron Levracha, he called it a letter in the scroll, but I think instead you've made your story into a theme within the fugue, your own rendition of a fundamental saga playing out in God's symphony of history. And I'll end off with a quote from the Sifri and Devarim. Dorshe Rishumos Omrim, Ritzoncha shetakir misha amr v'haya olam, loma Aggadah. The expounders of metaphor say, do you wish to recognize the one who spoke and brought the world into being? Learn the Aggadah. Chazak. Mazel tov.
Wow, you made it all the way through to the end of this year. Thank you. These series are a passion of mine, and a lot of effort goes into them. I'd be grateful for your help in spreading the awareness to others. If you're interested in joining us live, getting the notes, or asking a question, please message me on Twitter at Isaacson, ISAACSON.